Morgan Blake. Entry number 009. The House That Whispers. Every house has a story, but some are better left untold. What if I told you that some homes are not meant to be lived in, that some stories are so dark they stain the very walls that hold them? What if I told you that even the strongest minds can be broken by a house that feeds on fear? Stay with me until the end, and you'll see why I had no choice but to believe in the impossible. I'm Morgan Blake, and this is the story of the House That Whispers. It all began with a call that could have come from any small town, the kind where life moves slowly and everyone knows each other's name. But there was something in the caller's voice, something that made me sit up and listen. The town's sheriff, a man who had seen his share of strange things, was almost pleading for help. A family had been found dead in their own home, and no one could explain how or why. I was intrigued, of course. But when he mentioned the house, how it had a reputation, how the townsfolk whispered about curses and bad luck, I felt the first stirrings of unease. I've heard plenty of stories, seen my share of haunted places, but this one felt different. It felt alive. The house stood on the edge of town, a large, looming structure that seemed to sag under the weight of its own history. The windows were dark, the paint peeling from the walls, but it wasn't just the neglect that made it feel menacing. It was as if the house was waiting, biding its time, feeding on the fear of those who dared to come near. I arrived just as the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows that made the house seem even more imposing. The sheriff met me outside, his face pale, his eyes darting nervously toward the house as he spoke. He told me about the family, a couple and their young daughter. They had moved in only a few months ago, excited to start a new life. But soon after, the mother began complaining of strange noises, whispers in the walls, footsteps in empty rooms. The father brushed it off, said it was just the house settling. But then the nightmares started. The sheriff hesitated, as if he wasn't sure how much to tell me. He said the father had changed, become withdrawn, paranoid. He stopped going to work, spent his days staring at the walls as if he could hear something no one else could. The mother grew frantic, begging him to leave the house, but he refused. Said they couldn't leave. Said the house wouldn't let them. And then, one morning, the neighbors noticed the curtains were drawn tight, the house unusually quiet. When the sheriff broke down the door, he found them in the living room. The mother was holding the child in her arms, as if trying to protect her from something. The father was sitting in a chair, staring at the walls, his eyes wide with terror. They were all dead, but there were no signs of violence, no injuries, no struggle. It was as if something had simply drained the life out of them. I've seen a lot of strange things in my time, but there was something about this case that made my skin crawl. The house was empty now, the bodies taken away, but the sheriff told me that no one would go inside. Not even him. He handed me the key, his hand trembling as he did, and told me to be careful. He said the house had a way of getting into your head, making you see things that weren't there. I took the key, feeling its cold weight in my hand, and walked up the steps. The door creaked open, revealing a dark hallway that seemed to stretch on forever. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of dust and decay. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight, and closed the door behind me. The silence was thick, almost oppressive, and I could feel the house watching me, waiting to see what I would do. I've spent the night in plenty of haunted places, but as I stood there in the dark, I realized that this house was different. It wasn't just haunted, it was alive. And it was hungry. The first thing I noticed was the cold. It wasn't the kind of cold you get from an old, drafty house, it was a deep, bone-chilling cold that seemed to seep into my very soul. I could see my breath misting in the air, feel the goosebumps rising on my skin. The house was silent, but it was a silence that felt wrong, unnatural, as if the house was holding its breath, waiting for me to make the first move. I began to explore, my footsteps echoing in the empty rooms. The house was large, much larger than it appeared from the outside, with long, winding hallways that seemed to twist and turn in impossible ways. The walls were lined with old, faded wallpaper, the floors covered in thick layers of dust. But it wasn't the neglect that bothered me, it was the feeling that I wasn't alone. I could feel eyes on me, could hear the faintest of whispers, like the house was talking to itself, trying to decide what to do with me. I made my way to the living room, where the family had been found. The room was dark, the curtains drawn tight, but I could still see the outlines of the furniture, the faint impressions in the carpet where the bodies had lain. There was a chair in the corner, facing the wall, and as I approached it, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The air was thick with the scent of something foul, something rotten, and I had to fight the urge to turn and run. I forced myself to sit in the chair, trying to imagine what the father must have felt as he sat there, staring at the walls. I closed my eyes, trying to clear my mind, but all I could see were shadows, twisting and writhing in the corners of my vision. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I could feel the house closing in around me, pressing in on all sides. I opened my eyes, but the shadows didn't go away. They were everywhere, creeping along the walls, reaching out with long, twisted fingers. I could see faces in the dark, pale and gaunt, their eyes empty and soulless. They were watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest, and backed away from the chair. The room seemed to tilt, the walls closing in, the shadows growing darker. I could hear footsteps behind me, but when I turned, there was no one there. The whispers were louder now, filling my head with their sick, twisted words. They were telling me to leave, to get out while I still could. But I couldn't leave. Not yet. I had to know what had happened in this house, what had driven the family to their deaths. I had to find a way to break the house's hold before it was too late. I moved through the house, the whispers following me, growing louder with each step. The walls seemed to close in, the hallways twisting and turning, leading me in circles. The house was a maze, a trap, and I could feel it tightening around me, trying to keep me from leaving. I found myself in the kitchen, the air thick with the scent of rot. The counters were covered in dust, the cabinets hanging open, their contents spilled on the floor. There were dishes in the sink, still dirty, as if the family had just walked away in the middle of a meal. The fridge was open, its contents spoiled and rancid. But it wasn't the decay that bothered me, it was the feeling that I was being watched. I could feel eyes on me, could hear the faintest of whispers, like the house was talking to itself, trying to decide what to do with me. I turned, expecting to see someone standing there, but the room was empty. The shadows were darker here, thicker, and I could see them moving, twisting and writhing, as if they were alive. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest, but the shadows followed me, reaching out with long, twisted fingers. I could hear the whispers in my head, telling me to leave, to get out while I still could. But I couldn't leave. Not yet. I had to know what had happened in this house, what had driven the family to their deaths. I made my way to the basement, the air growing colder with each step. The stairs creaked under my weight, the walls closing in, the darkness pressing down on me. The basement was pitch black, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. I could hear the faintest of whispers, like the house was talking to itself, trying to decide what to do with me. I found the light switch and flicked it on, but the bulb flickered and died, leaving me in darkness. I pulled out my flashlight, the beam cutting through the thick blackness, revealing a room full of old, forgotten things. Boxes stacked haphazardly, covered in dust and cobwebs. Old furniture, broken and discarded. But it wasn't the clutter that bothered me, it was the feeling that I wasn't alone. I could feel eyes on me, could hear the faintest of whispers, like the house was talking to itself, trying to decide what to do with me. I turned, expecting to see someone standing there, but the room was empty. The shadows were darker here, thicker, and I could see them moving, twisting and writhing, as if they were alive. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest, but the shadows followed me, reaching out with long, twisted fingers. I could hear the whispers in my head, telling me to leave, to get out while I still could. But I couldn't leave. Not yet. I had to know what had happened in this house, what had driven the family to their deaths. I found a door in the back of the basement, hidden behind a stack of old boxes. The door was old, the wood rotting, the paint peeling. I reached for the handle, but it was cold, like ice. The whispers were louder now, filling my head with their sick, twisted words. They were telling me to leave, to get out while I still could. But I couldn't leave. Not yet. I had to know what was behind that door. I pushed it open, the hinges creaking in protest, and stepped inside. The room was small, barely more than a closet, but the air was thick with the scent of rot. The walls were covered in old, faded wallpaper, the floor covered in thick layers of dust. But it wasn't the decay that bothered me, it was the feeling that I wasn't alone. I could feel eyes on me, could hear the faintest of whispers, like the house was talking to itself, trying to decide what to do with me. I turned, expecting to see someone standing there, but the room was empty. The shadows were darker here, thicker, and I could see them moving, twisting, and writhing, as if they were alive. In the corner of the room, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a small, tattered doll, its face cracked and broken, its eyes dark and empty. It was sitting in a small wooden chair, facing the wall, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, and I had to fight the urge to turn and run. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening, filling my head with their sick, twisted words. They were telling me to leave, to get out while I still could. But I couldn't leave. Not yet. I had to know what had happened in this house, what had driven the family to their deaths. I reached out and picked up the doll, its body cold and stiff in my hands. The moment I touched it, the whispers stopped, and the room fell into an eerie silence. I could feel the house watching me, waiting to see what I would do. I looked down at the doll, its eyes dark and empty, and suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. It was as if something had reached inside me, grabbed hold of my heart, and squeezed. I dropped the doll, gasping for breath, and stumbled back, clutching my chest. The shadows were closing in, the darkness pressing down on me, and I could hear the whispers again, louder this time, more insistent. They were telling me to leave, to get out while I still could. But I couldn't move. The pain in my chest was too much, and I could feel myself slipping away, the darkness closing in around me. I don't remember how I made it out of the basement, how I found my way back to the living room. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in the same chair the father had sat in, staring at the walls. The shadows were gone, the whispers had stopped, but the house was still alive, still watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I could feel the house inside my head, twisting my thoughts, making me doubt what was real and what wasn't. I could hear footsteps in the hallways, see shadows moving out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. The house was toying with me, testing my limits, seeing how far it could push me before I broke. I knew I had to get out, had to leave before the house consumed me like it had consumed the family. But every time I tried to stand, the pain in my chest would return, sharp and intense, and I would find myself back in the chair, staring at the walls. I don't know how long I sat there, trapped in that chair, but it felt like an eternity. The house was in my head, twisting my thoughts, making me see things that weren't there. I could hear the whispers again, faint at first, but growing louder, more insistent. They were telling me to stay, to give in, to let the house have me. But I couldn't give in. I had to find a way out, had to break the house's hold on me before it was too late. I closed my eyes, trying to clear my mind, trying to focus on something other than the whispers, the shadows, the pain in my chest. I thought about the family, about what they must have gone through, how they had suffered in this house. I thought about the little girl, how she must have been so scared, so alone, trapped in a house that wanted to devour her. And then I felt it, a presence, faint at first, but growing stronger, like a light in the darkness. It was the little girl. I could feel her, see her in my mind, reaching out to me, begging for help. She was trapped in the house, just like I was, and she needed me to save her. I opened my eyes, the pain in my chest subsiding, and I stood up, determined to find a way to break the house's hold. The whispers were louder now, more frantic, as if the house knew what I was planning, but I ignored them. I made my way to the front door, the shadows twisting and writhing around me, but I kept going, kept moving forward. I reached the door, my hand on the handle, and I could feel the house fighting me, trying to pull me back. The pain in my chest returned, sharp and intense, but I gritted my teeth and pulled the door open. The moment the door swung open, the whispers stopped, the shadows disappeared, and the house fell silent. I stepped outside, the cold night air hitting me like a wave, and I collapsed on the front steps, gasping for breath. I don't know how long I sat there, trying to catch my breath, but eventually, the pain in my chest faded, and I could think clearly again. The house was still behind me, dark and menacing, but its hold on me was broken. I had escaped, but I knew the house wasn't finished with me yet. I couldn't leave the little girl trapped inside, couldn't let the house claim another victim. I had to find a way to break the curse, to free her and anyone else who had been trapped in that house. I got up, my legs shaking, and made my way to the car. I grabbed my bag from the back seat, pulling out a small case that held my tools. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew I had to go back inside, had to find a way to destroy whatever was holding the house together. The whispers were back, faint and distant, but I could feel the house watching me, waiting to see what I would do. I pushed the front door open, stepping inside, and the house seemed to shudder, the walls groaning as if in pain. The air was thick with tension, the shadows darker and more oppressive, but I ignored them. I made my way to the basement, the stairs creaking under my weight, the darkness pressing down on me. The doll was still there, sitting in the chair, its eyes dark and empty, but I didn't look at it. I was focused on the door in the back of the basement, the room that had nearly killed me. I opened the door, the hinges creaking, and stepped inside. The room was as I had left it, the air thick with the scent of rot, the shadows twisting and writhing around me. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I pulled out my tools, setting them on the floor, and began to work. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew I would recognize it when I found it. I tore up the floorboards, ripped the wallpaper from the walls, searched every inch of that room until my hands were raw and bleeding. And then I found it, a small, hidden compartment in the floor, covered by a loose floorboard. I pried it open, the wood splintering under my hands, and found a small, leather-bound book. The pages were old and yellowed, the ink faded, but I could still make out the words. It was a journal, written by the house's original owner, a man who had dabbled in dark magic, who had bound the souls of the house's inhabitants to the walls, trapping them for all eternity. He had written about how the house fed on fear, how it grew stronger with each victim, how it would never let them go. I knew what I had to do. I had to destroy the book, had to break the curse and free the souls trapped in that house. I pulled out a lighter, the flame flickering in the darkness, and held it to the pages. The fire caught quickly, the flames consuming the paper, the ink bubbling and blistering as the book burned. The house shuddered, the walls groaning, the shadows twisting and writhing in agony. I could hear the whispers, louder now, screaming in pain, but I didn't stop. I held the book until it was nothing but ash, the fire burning out, the room falling into silence. The house was still, the shadows gone, the whispers silenced. I had done it. I had broken the curse. I made my way back upstairs, the air lighter, the darkness receding. The house was no longer alive, no longer feeding on fear. The souls trapped inside were free, including the little girl. I stepped outside, the cold night air filling my lungs, and I knew that the house would never claim another victim. It was just a house now, an empty, lifeless structure, with no more stories to tell. I never went back to that house, never saw it again. I left the town the next day, but the memories of that night stayed with me. The house may have been just a building, but the evil that lived there was real, and I knew there were other places like it, other houses with stories better left untold. I still hear the whispers sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone. They're faint, distant, but they're there, a reminder that not all stories have a happy ending. But I know now that I can fight back, that I can break the hold these places have on the people trapped inside. Every house has a story, but some are better left untold. This one, though, had to be told, if only to warn others. If you ever find yourself in a place that feels wrong, a place that whispers to you in the dark, listen to those whispers. Get out while you still can. Because some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Morgan Blake. End of entry.